Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. In addition to being the host of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I have 3 published novels. My latest is titled Lolita Firestone, a supernatural novel, and it is set in Sedona, Arizona and Cairo, Egypt. My previous novel is titled Family Recipes, a novel about Italian culture, Catholic guilt, and the culinary crime of the century. And my first novel is named Hardwood, a novel about college basketball and other games young men play, and that story deals with issues ranging from depression and racism to sex, religion, and university politics. All 3 novels are listed in the episode notes. I hope you will buy them, I hope you will read them, and I hope you will thoroughly enjoy them. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is famed novelist Larry McMurtry and his biographer, Tracy Daugherty, who is my guest during this episode. That bio, the first comprehensive biography of the novelist, is titled Larry McMurtry, A Life. It hit the cover of the New York Times Book Review, where critic Dwight Garner described the book as vastly entertaining, and I concur. I just read the book myself. Larry McMurtry has long fascinated me, and his biography did exactly what I was looking for it to do, which is a full telling of Mr. McMurtry's life, career, relationships, of which there were many, particularly with women. Now, Tracy Daugherty was born and raised in Midland, Texas, a fellow Texan like Larry McMurtry. He is the author of 6 novels, a novella collection, 6 short story collections, a book of personal essays, a collection of essays on literature and writing, as well as biographies of Joseph Heller, Joan Didion, Billy Lee Graham, Mary Evershed, and others. And now Larry McMurtry, who died in 2021 at the age of 84, but not before he wrote scads of novels, including noted ones such as The Last Picture Show, The Terms of Endearment, and Lonesome Dove. Lonesome Dove was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize and was also the source of a landmark television miniseries that was hugely popular back when we did miniseries before streaming came along. McMurtry also won an Academy Award for writing the screenplay for the movie Brokeback Mountain, along with his writing partner, Diane Osana. Tracy Daugherty joins us from Corvallis, Oregon. He teaches at Oregon State University. Tracy, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, Mike. Thank you.
To begin with, you're a really prolific writer. You produce so much content, much like Larry McMurtry, who's wrote, I think, about 30 books. And why Larry McMurtry? I mean, on the one hand, he's an obvious subject, but there's so many other subjects out there. What was it about Larry McMurtry that made you decide to devote so much time to him and to write such a comprehensive biography?
I have a strong personal interest in McMurtry because I also grew up in West Texas, as you mentioned. So for a kid of my generation who wanted to be a writer pretty early on in life, Larry McMurtry was just unavoidable. By the time I was reading seriously, he had already established himself as Texas' most important novelist. He published his first book in 1961, Horsemen Pass By. And I think the first book of his I read was probably The Last Picture Show when I was a little older. But whether you liked his work or not, if you were a Texas wannabe writer, you had to reckon with him one way or another. So I've been reading him all my life and always looked forward to every book he wrote. Didn't always like every piece that he put out, but I did wrestle with it. So he was kind of the lion in the path for any young writer of my age. So I've been thinking about him forever. And at a certain point, I thought I really would like to take him on and figure out how he did what he did.
Yeah, I'm a big reader of Larry McMurtry too. I've not by any means read all of his books, but read several of them. My favorite's The Last Picture Show, personally. What was your favorite McMurtry novel? Is there one that you can identify that you enjoyed more than all others?
Well, the odd thing about McMurtry, of course, is that he wrote such a variety of novels. So he wrote historical novels, the Westerns, which are probably his best known books. But he also wrote a number of contemporary novels, The Last Picture Show among them. I think among the contemporary novels, my favorite is All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers, which is a book about Houston and also a book about a young writer. So it's very autobiographical. The Last Picture Show is a fave. And I do think Lonesome Dove lives up to its hype. It is a great American epic.
Yeah, that was so well received, and it just wasn't my subject matter. But I was reading. I didn't finish the book, but I was reading it, and I understand why it was such a big hit. Just wasn't my subject matter. You mentioned All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers. Yeah, about a young writer. Larry McMurtry had very early success. He was just in his, how old was he? He was in his 20s when Horsemen Pass By was published, correct?
Yes, around the age of 30, and he was also writing several novels at once. So he published Horsemen Pass By and already had 2 other novels completed and ready to go at that time. So he was prolific right out of the gate.
You know, I also recall, and check me on this, that he had said, I saw, I always loved interviews with him because he's just he's a man of economy when it comes to his words, not his written words, but his spoken words.
It's a West Texas trait, being very wry and sardonic, I think.
Yeah, well, he definitely is that. And, he would write these meandering books. As you say, he had novels that were, a lot of people said, do you really need to write that one? It's just, Dwight Garner even said that sometimes it's just like he's typing. He's not writing, he's just typing. Yes. But at the same time, it was Dwight Garner who had many good things to say about him, and also your biography of him. But he did say I remember reading an interview where he said he was working on Lonesome Dove, and the prose had slowed to a crawl, and he set it aside and wrote The Desert Rose. And he wrote that in a matter of, I think, just a few weeks. He just dashed it off before he went back to Lonesome Dove.
That's right. I think he liked to take a break. He would write very long novels, and as you say, sometimes they would bog down, and he would get bored, and so he would set it aside and take up another project just to distract himself, and then he would come back to the old project with renewed energy. So it's a strategy that I think a lot of writers actually use. If you're writing a novel and need a break, you do a short story and give yourself a little energy boost. And McMurtry certainly did that. He wrote 5 to 10 pages a day all his life. He was very, very disciplined in that way.
Now, presumably, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, Tracy, but if you're writing 5 to 10 pages a day, you are producing a lot of copy, a lot of which you're just going to throw out because it just isn't making the grade. Did he ever talk about that productivity? It almost sounds like practice at the same time that he's writing. So do you have any insights as to the 5 to 10 pages, why so much copy, or how he related to what he produced on a daily basis? Because, I mean, if you take that word count, I mean, that's a novel in, a month or two, you've got a novel.
Yes. I think there are several ways to look at that. I think on the one hand, he had inherited a work ethic from his father. His father was a cattleman and a rancher on a Texas ranch. And I think McMurtry grew up with the idea of work being paramount, that you got up every morning and you did your chores. I mean, that was certainly true of ranch life. And I think he approached writing the same way. It was his morning chore. You got up and you did it. And some days you won't feel like doing it. And some days you won't do such a good job because you're only half awake or whatever. But I think it was simply an imperative that he inherited from his father. That's one thing. The other thing is we work the way we work. You're quite right that if you produce 5 to 10 pages a day, many of them are not going to be very good. You're going to have a very uneven product if you work that way. On the other hand, I think McMurtry could not work any other way. If he didn't do it the way he did it, he wouldn't have done it at all. So you can criticize the process and say this is a kind of a sloppy way of working, but I think McMurtry would answer it is simply a way of working, and it's better to do that than not work at all. The poet William Stafford once said, I write every day, just occasionally I lower my standards, and that's okay. At least you get it done.
Yes. And actually, I mean, the discipline is so admirable. And I think there's just so many writers out there who, because of procrastination or laziness or what have you, they like to be doing the same, but they just don't get it done. And obviously morning time, I love that analogy to morning chores. And I remember that in your book, in your biography of Larry, somebody said something to the effect of, if you leave a cow alone, he's going to eat the grass. If you leave Larry alone, he's going to write.
Yes, that was the art critic Dave Hickey, who was a good friend of McMurtry's. So he saw him close up and knew what he was looking at. I'm sure writers who take themselves very, very seriously and think of themselves as artists with a capital A. And there's nothing at all wrong with that, with having a good literary ambition. But I think McMurtry was a different kind of creature. He didn't really see himself as an artist. I think he saw himself as a worker. He got up and he did his work. And if it turned out to be art, great. If it didn't, fine, you move on.
Why was he successful so early, do you think? I mean, most people in their 20s, they don't even have the life experiences to really turn out a good novel. And his first one, Horseman Passed By, that was made into a movie, was it not?
It was made into the movie HUD with Paul Newman, yes, which was a great success as a movie.
And so why do you think he was successful so early? Do you think he just had that innate talent, or was there anything about his lifestyle or his work ethic? Obviously the work, I don't know if he was producing 5 to 10 pages a day even back then. And was that something he started in his early 20s?
Well, he did start writing very early on in high school and all through college. So he had the advantage of growing up among oral storytellers. I mean, he had brothers and he had uncles and his father's brothers who were wonderful storytellers. And of course, they were telling stories of the old cattle drives, which became a lot of McMurtry's material. They just endlessly would sit around the ranch and tell these stories late into the night. And he absorbed all of that. He was also just a good observer. Many of his old high school friends who wound up being models for the characters in The Last Picture Show later were a bit resentful, saying that, we did all this stuff and Larry just sat around and took it all in and made a lot of money off it. McMurtry later said, that wasn't true, that, fiction writers invent things. They don't just write what they see in front of them, but he was a good observer. So he had those advantages. But I think his success as a writer really comes down to two things. He had a wonderful ear for dialogue because he had that experience of listening to storytellers. And he had a sense of character. He once said that plot is interesting, but not essential. Style is important, but not essential. That finally it comes down to character. If readers don't care about the people in those books, then they're not going to read them. So he paid attention to character and to the way they talked.
Yeah, I love that quote. In fact, I took that one down from your book because I liked it so much. I collect quotes, and that one I've added to my collection. And there was more to it than what you just said, but that was the essence of it, that it's about character. And he just wrote the hell out of characters. You knew his characters backwards and forwards when you read his books. He just covered so much of their thinking, so much of their actions. So very big on character development. Now, you mentioned growing up on a ranch, and you mentioned in the people of Archer, Texas, being angry at him that, wow, look at the way you portrayed our town. His parents weren't really happy with his writing either. I mean, to begin with, he grows up on a ranch. He decides the ranch life's not for me. I want to be a writer. And I don't know if that got their noses out of joint, but they didn't really care for some of the stuff he was writing. What about the relationship with his parents? And can you elaborate a little bit on what it was in his writing that his parents objected to, other than the characterization of Archer City, which, okay, you characterize the town and its people as something that we don't believe they are. But that wasn't just that one book, though, that they objected to, correct?
Correct. Early on, he manifested a kind of shyness around animals. He was very good with animals, with horses and all of the animals on the ranch, but he didn't really care for them. And so early on, his father saw that he was not going to be a cowboy. And also he was kind of myopic. He didn't have great eyesight. So a good cowboy has to be able to see far into the distance. So from a very early age, he disappointed his father, I think, that he wasn't going to grow up to be a good ranch hand. And then he turned to books. McMurtry said he never really remembered how he learned to read. It just seemed as though he always did read. And his father would look at him and say, well, what are you wasting your time for with all these books? So he was considered kind of an odd duck by his family. And then as he got older and got into his teens and got into puberty and adolescence, he found the atmosphere of Archer City very repressive, and the sort of sexual mores of the place really were oppressive for him. And plus, he went to school with the same people year after year after year. So boys and girls looking for models of who's attractive and how do I be attractive to the opposite sex, and how do you get into a relationship? All these things were very difficult. It felt sort of incestuous there in Archer City because there weren't too many choices to be made. So he found it very oppressive, and that became a major subject matter for him. He wrote about sexuality and how do you grow up with a healthy sexual attitude in a very oppressive atmosphere. And of course, that material is what upset his parents and upset the town. They thought he was sex obsessed and that his work was too drenched in eroticism, which was just something you didn't talk about in West Texas. So that was kind of what got him in trouble with the town and with his family.
And yet there was nothing really explicit about his writing.
No, not at all, not at all. It's just the fact that he would even raise the subject at all, which was just a kind of a taboo subject.
Yeah. In your book, Polly Platt, the American movie producer, you quote her as saying that Larry McMurtry was a mystery. He was the quote unquote unknowable man. And that's one of the reasons I was really anxious to read your biography of him, because he struck me that way too. I always wanted to know more about Larry, but he wouldn't reveal himself that much. In the interviews I would hear him in, whether in print or an audio interview, he was, again, taciturn. Do you feel that is Larry still an unknowable man to you, or do you feel like you got to the core of him and that he's now knowable to the readers of your biography?
No, I think biographers can only penetrate so far into the psyches of their subjects. And I don't tend to take a psychological approach to my subjects. I think of biography as cultural history more than anything else. I think what we can look at is what was going on around McMurtry at the time, what was going on in the world, what sorts of forces and social pressures were happening that caused him to think the way he did and to write the way he did. But what was actually going on in the very center of his mind, I don't think I or anyone else can ever get there. So no, there's always an unknowable component to any biographical subject. And it's particularly true of McMurtry because I think the word you used, taciturn, is exactly right. Again, that's a West Texas trait. If you hang around any old West Texas men, of which I am one now, I'm becoming one myself, they're not very talkative. They'll sit around and talk about the weather and talk about how the animals are doing, but they won't talk about themselves, and certainly not emotional issues. It's just not something West Texas men tend to talk about. And McMurtry certainly had those traits.
And yet he had a great desire to communicate, but his communication was in writing. He did it promiscuously, you might say, because some people just said, his supply, and this is right out of your biography, paraphrasing your biography, but his supply of writing exceeded the demand. There were times when it was like another McMurtry book, and does it really need to be this long? And was this one really a piece, the kind of piece of work that he should be producing? What about that? Plus the whole idea of, somebody had said, and I'm not sure if it was you, Tracy, or one of the sources in your book said, you take Larry's collection of novels in their totality, and that's really what it's about. Yes, you have the great ones and then you have the weak ones, but if you take it in its totality, it communicates something really significant.
That's how I came to see his entire body of work, is that you have to read it as one long stream of narrative. If you look at any individual book, you can say, well, the plot's a little baggy, this story kind of meanders and doesn't end up anywhere. But if you connect that one book to all the other books, you start to see where it fits in a much longer river of story. And I think the historical novels and the contemporary novels come together in that way. In the Westerns, the old Westerns, he'll have figures that resemble Billy the Kid. And then you come up to a novel that's set in the 1960s or 1970s, and it'll be a contemporary character, but having the same traits as Billy the Kid. And you see, these generational changes are not so vastly different after all, that there is a through line between the Old West and contemporary West Texas. You can see how the society, continues to develop along certain lines. And so if you look at his whole body of work, and, most people can't read 40 some odd books of McMurtry, but if you do that, you realize this is one vast history of a region, and it's remarkable in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to make the point to our listeners that even though Polly Platt referred to him as an unknowable man, and even though Tracy Daugherty, my guest, says, you can't know him in his totality, the biography is just loaded with information, really interesting information. Like Dwight Garner said, vastly entertaining as well, and it really mines his life and his style. And one of the things that you really bring to light, Tracy, is that he was really a rambling man. He liked to move around. He was in an automobile driving highways and byways of America, well, mostly the West. Talk about that a little bit. It almost seemed like he almost had a sort of physical attention deficit disorder where he needed to be on the move.
Yeah, and I do think, this kind of contradicts what I said a few seconds ago, that you can't really get into the psychology of a person, but I do think maybe this does go back to his childhood in the sense that on the ranch, he felt a bit of a misfit. He wasn't going to be a cowboy. He didn't really, his reading habits separated him from everyone around him. So I think he grew up feeling that he didn't know where he belonged. And as an adult, this translated into his rambling ways. He, as you say, he would crisscross the country in automobiles just all the time, and he would even write as he drove. He'd be writing in his head, and then he would settle down into a motel room somewhere and write it out. He was always on the move because I think he didn't really feel he belonged, and yet he always wound up coming back to Texas one way or another. He would roam to Washington, D.C. He would go to California. He loved Hollywood. He liked spending time out there. But he would always return to Archer City. And in fact, he wound up, living half of each year toward the end of his life in Archer City, even though he, in many ways, hated the place. It was a very, very much a love-hate relationship he had with his hometown. So he tried to escape Texas and never quite could. And I think that's also part of the roaming aspect of his life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I found interesting is that he knew he wanted to be a novelist in his 20s. He had early success. Horseman Pass By is made into a movie. Leaving Cheyenne was also was a second book. Is that right? And that was also made into a movie, right?
It was made into a very bad movie called Loving Molly.
And then his third one, Last Picture Show?
Yes.
And that was made into a movie. So his first three novels are made into movies of varying quality. Last Picture Show was a good one and launched careers for some people. But here he has this early success, and then he had a crisis of confidence in his 30s. What was that about?
Yes, and this is detailed in All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers, which, as I said earlier, is very autobiographical. It's about a young writer who really loses faith in writing. And I think this is McMurtry's fifth book. And around that time, again, his early 30s, I think he had come to feel several things, one of which was that he had exhausted his material. In all those early books, he's writing about the death of the Old West. The ranching life, the cowboy life that his father grew up with was dying by the time McMurtry was born. The cattle business was very tough. Cowboys really no longer existed. So it was kind of already an ancient myth by the time McMurtry inherited it, and he saw there was no future in that kind of life. So that's what he wrote about. And then he did that through the first 4 or 5 books and felt, I've exhausted my material. He was getting tired of Texas as material. And then he also felt that what am I doing? I'm spending my days writing about life instead of living it. And I think he felt, and he actually says this in All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers, that normal life is not really available to a writer, because you're not really living life. You're not experiencing relationships. You're analyzing them. You're writing about them, and you're walling yourself off from other people in that way. And I think that really became a serious concern for him, and for someone who wrote as much as he did every day. You can see that it would become a kind of a problem, and he had to work through that. It was a combination of feeling isolated and also weary, I think. And it took him several years to kind of work his way out of that despair.
It is a lonely business. I mean, sitting alone in a room, presumably most people do sit by themselves in a room. That's the way they write. And I can see where that can come to be. Now, he, by the way, all My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers. That's another one of his that I've read, and I enjoyed that one very much as well. I loved the autobiographical aspect to it. Now, that also kind of suggests that, so he kind of broke out of that, though, the rambling man aspect. Look, I'm going to get in my car, I'm going to drive, I'm going to go places. He had a lot of relationships, especially with women. He seemed to understand women. In the book, one of your sources said he was not a womanizer, but a romancer. But at the same time, they said he wasn't entirely comfortable with women in the bedroom. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think McMurtry had an interesting idea about romantic relationships, and he wanted to keep the romance. And I think up close intimacy in his mind was a way of familiarity breeding contempt, that after a while you grow tired because you fall into routines. And he really wanted to avoid falling into routines with the women who were important to him. So keeping a little distance between them and him maintained the romance. I think a lot of his relationships with women were carried out through correspondence rather than being with them all the time. He also, though, did say that if he met a very interesting woman and the choice was either have, a brief physical pleasure with this woman or a lifelong friendship, he would choose lifelong friendship. He really did value talking to women. He used women as confidants. He was very honest and open with the women in his life, and they with him. So I think these were very deep relationships, and in that sense, as you say, he came to understand women, or at least most critics look at his books and say, for a male writer, he writes female characters very well because he spent a lot of time talking to them. And that was really the important side of a relationship for him. And I think a great deal of his writing is an attempt to hear women's voices. We talked about West Texas men being taciturn, but the women were as well. Women of his family were tended to be very quiet because women weren't expected to talk. The men sort of kept them in the background. And McMurtry said in a number of interviews that he was very frustrated. You'd hear the men tell stories all day long. You'd hear their voices, but you wouldn't hear the women talk. And he really wanted women's voices to come to the forefront. And I think many of his novels are attempts to really let women talk.
He has a lot of female characters. He treats them with he gives them a lot of space in his books. He clearly favors and understands them. He would have multiple intimate relationships with women, and when I say emotionally intimate anyway, maybe not physically, but he might have 5 or 6 women at a time who he considered intimates, and in different places. Is that right? And again, Larry was a rambling man. He traveled from place to place. He got antsy anytime he was in one place too long. So and I remember at one point, one of the women said, you've got 5 girlfriends? Do they know about each other? He said, God, no.
Yes, exactly. He would move on. Another reason for having the car handy, I guess.
So he had some famous women, too, who were such as Cybil Shepard. I think Cybil Shepard said that Larry was the love of her life.
She did say that, and when a reporter asked her, "What do you mean by that? Do you mean, a romantic relationship?" And she said, "No, it goes much deeper than that." So again, they did have a physical relationship very briefly. Cybil Shepard writes about that in her memoir. But long term, again, it was just a very close friendship which lasted throughout his life. Similarly with Diane Keaton, another actress with whom he became very close. One thing he liked to do was collaborate with these women. He worked on screenplays with Diane Keaton and Cybil Shepard. So in addition to the friendship, these were working relationships, which is probably how they got to be close in the first place. They were all involved in making movies together.
Yeah, there were two famous ones right there, Diane Keaton and Cybil Shepard. He was also close friends with Susan Sontag. Used to eat caviar with her. In fact, when she was dying, you wrote that he had caviar sent to her bedside while he was away at the time, and had caviar sent to her bedside.
Yes. He didn't have very many literary friends. This is what's interesting. He felt that he didn't really belong in the white hot center of New York publishing. He didn't feel at home there either. But Susan Sontag was his one really close literary friend in New York. And as you say, they would go out and eat up all the raw fish in New York. And so, yes, when Sontag was in the hospital in her last days, he had some caviar sent to her bedside. And it was his loving way of saying goodbye.
Now, on the one hand, Larry was a pretty austere guy. He wasn't fancy. He would, you mentioned great details. You mentioned he'd put on his belt and he'd miss some of the loops, and he was not a fashion plate. But at the same time, he lived a really, in some ways, spoiled life. And he admitted that, I'm spoiled. I've got money. I eat caviar. Hollywood has embraced me. Talk a little bit about he won an Academy Award. I mean, again, his first three books are turned into movies. The Terms of Endearment came later. That was turned into a big hit movie. He lived almost a dichotomous life. On the one hand, it was Larry, the working man, got up in the morning, did his chores, driving a vehicle across the highways and byways of America. And then there was the Larry who was champagne and caviar.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons that Cybil Shepard said she loved him so much, was that he was this sophisticated intellectual who also could enjoy a good greasy cheeseburger. So those were the two sides of Larry. He never lost the West Texas kid in him. He wore boots and blue jeans because he wanted to be comfortable. He would not bow to fashion if it made him uncomfortable. So when he attended the Academy Award ceremony and won the Oscar, he wore jeans, and he told everybody, "Well, I lost my tuxedo," which was not true. He just wanted to be comfortable.
Well, he had a tuxedo from the waist up, right? And then he had
right.
Blue jeans
exactly,
and boots.
Exactly. Yeah, he was not going to sit there and be uncomfortable all evening long with a bunch of blowhards talking from the stage. But as you say, he had expensive tastes. He grew to like good food and good wine and the company of pretty women. I mean, this is what he himself said. And he knew that about himself. Early on, he told his literary agent, "I like Hollywood money because it feels unreal. It feels like this money is not really real. And so I can spend it, lavishly." And he liked doing that. And he admitted that he liked it. Which is one thing that's very charming about McMurtry. I think he's an incredibly honest person. We've talked about how he withholds a lot. You can't get too close to him. He's not going to tell you things he doesn't want you to know. But on the other hand, there is such an honest quality to his writing. When he has a flaw, like he has expensive tastes, he'll admit it. When he feels that he's not leading a normal life and that there's something wrong with being a writer, he'll admit it. So there are these openings in his work that lead you to feel that you are getting a glimpse of him, and it's a charming honesty. But again, that was part of his contradictory character.
And when I would read his books, I always felt there was a certain kind of an underlying sadness. And then when I read your biography, It sounded like Larry had the blues a lot of the time. He suffered from melancholia. Did he? I mean, would you say that Larry, at various stages of his life, suffered from depression? Let's say early to midlife, because I know that late in life, when he had heart surgery and all that, and he was kind of immobilized at that time, and certainly emotionally sounded depressed. But did he battle with depression throughout his life, or was it just kind of a downcast sort of view on life?
No, I think absolutely. You put your finger on it. He did suffer from depression from an early age, and it was something that came and went in various degrees of severity. I think that moment we talked about earlier, when he was worrying about the writing life, was truly a depressed stage of life for him. It was a crisis. He wondered whether to continue, and that wasn't the only time. I think many points during his career, he thought about stopping writing because he felt it was isolating him, and that he was not really leading a normal life. You know, he did not have children. He did not settle down with a single wife all his life. And I think part of him wanted that, and he felt he couldn't get there. I think the fact that he grew up feeling that he didn't belong, that he felt alienated from his environment, and yet he couldn't escape that environment. He was drawn to come back to it. He was looking for a place to fit, and I think he never quite felt that he found it. And I think that led to a great deal of depression. And then, as you say, late in life, which we can talk about this, after the heart surgery and his health began to fail late in life, that certainly plunged him into a deeper depression.
So he got married twice. Early in life, he got married and then divorced. And then late in life, he got married. But he spent most of his life as a single, rambling man. His feeling, the sense of not fitting in, included, I believe, his teaching at Rice University. He was a writing instructor there. If I recall correctly, Tracy, he never really enjoyed teaching all that much, and he was very straightforward in his criticism of the writing that students would do. Is that correct? Do I remember that right?
In fact, I think we can go so far as to say he pretty much hated teaching. He didn't really fit. I mean, he was himself an academic. He got a master's degree at Rice, and a voracious reader. So in some ways, as a student, he was certainly comfortable in the academic environment, but he did not want to teach. I think he found, as you say, the student writing he had no patience for trying to bring young writers along that way. He was quite kind to young writers that he met, once he was publishing, and he would meet young writers who were just starting their careers, and he would help them in their careers. But he did not want to be an editor the way teachers have to be. Writing teachers have to edit their students' work, and he didn't want to spend time doing that. And he also, I think, felt that academia in general produced a lot of mediocrity. I think he wanted more discipline from his colleagues. You know, he wrote 5 pages a day. He expected all his colleagues to do that as well. And that's just not a realistic expectation. So I think he was disappointed by the environment to some degree. So yeah, he did not really fit at Rice, and then later at TCU in Fort Worth, he taught for a little while. And movie money saved him. Really, it was when his first novel got turned into HUD, that movie money got him out of teaching. He was able to then really devote his life to writing, and he does owe it to Hollywood.
And he wrote screenplays, not just
Yes.
Brokeback Mountain. Hollywood is a source of income, and gave him that kind of freedom. Now, when he had that crisis of confidence in his 30s, do you think that part of what was disappointing to him about the writing was that it wasn't achieving what he was setting out to do? Because I recall that he really wanted to mythologize the West. But rather than demythologizing it, people kind of lit up to the West. It's kind of like, they liked the lifestyle he was writing about. It was an opportunity to kind of live that lifestyle vicariously, and interesting characters and people of different mentalities than perhaps they were living around. Was that part of it, do you think, or was there something else going on?
No, I think that's a great point. And I think he would be the first to say that in many ways, he failed as a writer because precisely what you said, he wanted to demythologize the West, that we romanticize these cowboy figures, these lone men riding off into the sunset and doing heroic deeds and settling the West and taming the West and leading the animals on long treks. And McMurtry's whole point was, well, we've spoiled the environment. We have eradicated many indigenous peoples. We've done terrible things. These men were violent. They were terrible with relationships and with their children. He wanted to present the harsher side of it and the real side of it. And Lonesome Dove, if you actually look at what goes on in that novel and who those men are, Gus and Call, the two main characters in that novel, are pretty terrible men. They have failed relationships. They steal cattle. They kill people. They get their own people killed by being reckless, and they wipe out Indians. And it's horrible what they do. And yet readers love them. They're charming because they're funny. The dialogue is irresistible. And then, of course, when it got made into the miniseries starring Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Duvall, these guys are irresistible too. You can't not love those actors because they do such a good job, and so they seem heroic. And McMurtry was perplexed by this. He wanted to present, the realities of the West, and he wound up deepening the romance, and it frustrated him. He called Lonesome Dove a kind of version of Gone with the Wind, and really what he wanted to do was write a kind of War and Peace.
Yeah, exactly. So. Let's talk about his, he had, I believe, congestive heart. He had heart problems. He had heart surgery.
Yeah,
and you had said that, relating to what he had said, I believe when he had heart surgery, they literally removed the heart from his body and then had to put him on a machine that put the heart back in at the end of the surgery. And that he felt like a different person when he was recovering from that surgery, and not just during recovery, but even after that. If I'm remembering right, he felt as though, are you the same person if you've had your heart taken out and then put back in?
Right. Yeah, he had quadruple bypass surgery, and I think the medical techniques have improved since those days, but. At that time, they cut his chest open and they remove the heart and stop it and put you on a heart-lung machine, which breathes for you and pumps your blood for you while they patch up the heart. So there's this odd moment for him where he thinks, well, my heart literally stopped. So in a sense, technically I'm dead. And how do you come back from that? And then they shock the heart back into rhythm once they have done the bypasses. And so he put it that my physical body survived, but myself did not. What happened to myself during that odd interval when I was on the operating table? And he felt that he never was quite the same person. He even went so far as to say, the biography of my life, everything that happened to me up to that moment seemed to belong to somebody else. When I came across that quote, as a biographer, of course, it kind of startled me, like, whose biography am I writing? I mean, that's the question he would ask. And he never did quite feel the same. He felt fine physically right after the surgery because the doctors did a wonderful job and he recovered physically. But emotionally, it just took something out of him. And he went through another period of depression about writing. He would pump out the 5 pages a day, but he really felt no inspiration behind them. And Hollywood directors would be sending him screenplays and he didn't want to work on them. And really, this is where his late life writing partner, Diane Osana, enters the story and becomes quite heroic. She was a legal assistant in Tucson that he had met her. And she had the writing experience from being a legal assistant. And he kind of turned to her as a writing partner to help him first type and then actually write screenplays. And she really nurtured him back to health and back to life, both by being there for him and letting him, move into her house and taking care of him quite literally day by day, but also writing with him and helping him get back into that process. And she really saved him, I think.
Now, I believe Larry said, I basically spent a year just lying on the sofa and thinking. And I believe it was that period and lacking the inspiration. Diane Osana comes along, and I believe she was the one who conveyed to him the idea about writing a novel about Pretty Boy Floyd.
Yes, exactly.
Is that right?
Well, it was
that brought him back to that, got him inspired again, as I recall.
It was going to be a screenplay. It was one of the screenplay's ideas that were sent to him, and people wanted him to write this movie about Pretty Boy Floyd. He didn't know who Pretty Boy Floyd was. He thought he was a boxer, and of course he was a wanted criminal. And Osana saw that he was going to turn this down, and it would be one more missed opportunity for him to come back to life. And she said, you've got to do this. And she did a lot of the research herself and just kept prodding him to please take this project on. And it seems like he began this as a kind of joke. He'd said to her, well, I'll do it if you'll help me. And then it turned serious that she was going to help. She was going to do anything she could to prod him back to life. And so they did collaborate on this screenplay. And it was never made into a movie. That the project fell through in Hollywood. But with that material, they then published a novel about Pretty Boy Floyd with both of their names on the byline.
Now, throughout his life, you mentioned that he never really felt at home in the New York literary scene. And he didn't really feel that he was respected by the book publishing establishment, is my understanding. And in fact, he used to wear a T-shirt on occasion that said, what did it say? Something like minor regional author or something like that?
Minor regional novelist, yes.
So he never felt like that the New York firmament there saw him as a serious novelist. But at the same time, Norman Mailer was quoted as saying, he's too good. If I start reading him, I start writing like him.
Yes.
So, and he was probably reading the best Larry had to offer. And that's quite a compliment. And Norman Mailer is not given to compliments. He was a guy who was very critical of other authors. So for him to say, put out a thought like that about Larry McMurtry, that's a big deal. Well, now, Larry didn't seem. Go ahead. Finish that.
I was going to say, I think this is a chip that many Western writers have on their shoulder, and it's not entirely unwarranted. That the Eastern, things have changed a lot in publishing, but I think we can still say that in many ways, New York remains a kind of publishing center. And so the publishing world is established in the East, and writers who write about the West, I think, have long felt that the publishing industry simply does not understand the West, doesn't understand the subject, doesn't understand why the West is important, sees the West in somewhat cliched terms as being uncivilized. I mean, this has long been a complaint among Western writers. And one of McMurtry's old mentors, Wallace Stegner at Stanford University, even wrote an essay about this, that the Western writer who wants to be recognized by the publishing world is going to, again, be alienated and feel like he or she doesn't fit in because the East just won't respect the material. And I think McMurtry certainly felt that, like many other writers. He wasn't the only one from the West who felt that. So that's just a little bit of background, that it wasn't just McMurtry, that it's a long complaint from Westerners.
Yes. So in addition to his passion for writing and his passion for women, the other dimension of Larry's life is a passion for books, collecting books. He was a rare bookseller. He spent decades and decades. I think he had two rare bookstores, one in Archer City called Booked Up, and it occupied 6 buildings. Check me on this, but occupied 6 buildings and contained 400,000 volumes. Yes. Now, were those all rare books? With that, did he was such an aggressive collector of rare books that he got up to 400,000 volumes?
They weren't all rare books. Many of them were, but he would buy books of any stripe that he felt he could sell. But he was a very discerning collector of all types of books, travel books, art books, books about Chinese porcelain, even pornography. He knew his pornography, and not so much as a connoisseur of it, but as somebody who knew what would sell to an audience. He understood the importance of all different kinds of publishing. And he had as many books as existed in the Rice University Library when he was a student there. That was one of his goals, was to have as many books as the library. And he did. He wound up having an amazing series of stores in Archer City. He wanted Archer City to be a book destination. He wanted people from all over the world to know about Archer City and to come to it and to think of it as a book destination. Because when he was a kid growing up there were almost no books in town. Nobody read. And his dream of turning it into a book town was quite ambitious and amazing. And he almost succeeded. But he couldn't quite lure other booksellers to come there. And so now I think Archer City is once again a kind of empty place. His bookstores have been sold now that he's passed on. And, the dream did not get realized. But for a while, it was quite amazing what he had done there in West Texas.
Then he eventually auctioned off 2/3 of the books because he wanted to consolidate what he had. And his own private library was 30,000 books that he had spread over 3 houses, is my understanding. Yeah. So he was, the era of the ebook and the audiobook probably was not something that he felt so good about. He loved the actual physical product. And, and I got to say, your biography, I did the audio edition. It allows me to, because I read all day anyway, professionally. So give the eyes a break and put the ears to,
yes,
to work.
Well, one of McMurtry's great moments was at the Academy Awards ceremony when he and Diane Osano won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. He got up and in his acceptance speech, he hailed all the booksellers of the world, which I think kind of perplexed the movie audience. They thought he was going to be talking about movies. But he said, this screenplay was originally a book. It was based on Annie Proulx's story, Brokeback Mountain. And he said, well, so without books, we don't have stories. And, we must continue to support the culture of the book. We must not lose it. And that was one of his great passionate moments.
Yes, I remember that. In fact, I watch Academy Awards every year, and I remember his receiving the award along with Diana. And but then when I read your biography, I went to YouTube and I called that up, and just to see him accept that award and hear what he had to say and see what he looked like when after hearing about, he said he lost his tuxedo pants and had put jeans on and all that. I wanted to see it all over again. One of the things I didn't realize is a couple things. One is that he was good friends with Ken Kesey. And although they had it sounded like a little bit of a tortured friendship, they disagreed on some things. And then there was also, Swifty Lazar, somebody who I've heard of my whole life and never really knew who he really was until I read your biography. But let's start with Ken Kesey. They meet at Stanford. They're learning from Wallace Stegner. They're part of the Stegner program there. And Ken Kesey wasn't, he wanted to kind of be I forget how you put it. Larry McMurtry was focused on writing novels. Ken Kesey writes a smash novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. A lot of people say Sometimes a Great Notion is his best book. But he was always looking for something more spectacular. We'll talk about that relationship a little bit.
Yeah, you couldn't find two men more different than Ken Kesey and Larry McMurtry, and yet they formed a very close friendship. Interestingly enough, they both came from very conservative backgrounds. Kesey came from Oregon and McMurtry from Texas. But as one of their friends at that time at Stanford put it, this was the boring Eisenhower 50s, and we were ready for something more exciting. And Kesey led that charge. He really wanted to be kind of the head jester at the center of the court. And McMurtry was much more retiring and shy. He didn't need a lot of public attention, but Kesey craved public attention. and he thought writing was one way to do it. And McMurtry thought that Kesey was the most gifted writer he had ever seen. And in letters to Kesey, he would say, you're one of the best writers. You can actually change American literature, but you've got to keep at it. You can't quit now. You've only done a couple of books. You've got to keep going because you haven't done enough. And Kesey essentially quit. He did write a little bit after those first two novels, but he then turns to happenings, the high 1960s and the acid tests and LSD and the magic bus. And so Kesey wanted to create spectacles rather than write. And McMurtry really felt saddened by that because he thought Kesey was a great wasted talent.
So Ken Kesey was one of the merry pranksters. In fact, I think you may have instigated the whole thing. The bus driving around the country. That became what Tom Wolfe called the electric Kool-Aid acid test. His landmark book on the subject. Now, did Larry spend any time on that bus?
No, but the bus did come visit Larry. Larry had moved to Houston and was writing and teaching at Rice University, and he had become a young father. His son James had been born. And so Larry was living in a very quiet, rather conservative neighborhood in Houston, Texas, and Kesey decides to go across the country on the magic bus, which was painted up in psychedelic colors, and they're all flying high on LSD, and they pull into Houston. And the great story, of course, is that one of the women on the bus who was tripping on acid at the time gets off unclothed and sees McMurtry holding his young son, an infant, in his arms, and she grabs the baby and thinks it's her own child. And McMurtry is saying, ma'am, please, the baby's crying, please, please. And so there's this clash of cultures right there in a quiet Houston neighborhood.
Now, that child is James McMurtry, his one and only child, and who has become a successful musician.
Yes, James is a terrific songwriter and singer. If people don't know his music, they need to go find it. He inherited his father's storytelling abilities because his lyrics are just amazing. They're very complicated. They're little mini novels in themselves.
What about Swifty Lazar? He came into Larry's life how? I mean, give a little bit of the background on Swifty. I think he went from movies to books or being a literary agent, I believe. It was sad. I believe his wife died and his life was never the same. He had lost the love of his life and he seemed to have fallen into the blues as well. What role did Swifty play in Larry's life?
Well, Larry had a long-time literary agent, a woman named Dorothea Oppenheimer. And she didn't have a lot of clients in her life. Her two most famous clients were Larry McMurtry and Ernest Gaines. But she was very devoted, more than most literary agents. I think she saw her job as being more than just a professional obligation. She got personally involved in her authors' lives and would do anything for them. So she nurtured McMurtry's career for many, many years. But then she passed on around the time that McMurtry was shopping Lonesome Dove around. So he was about to hit his biggest success after decades, and his agent was dying. And at that point, Swifty Lazar swooped in and took over because he saw an opportunity with McMurtry. Swifty got his name Swifty because he was always making deals. He would make dozens of deals a day with actors and with authors. So I think it was Humphrey Bogart who gave him the name Swifty. That he'd make 3 deals in an hour on his behalf. And the other story about him was that everybody has 2 agents. They have their own agent, and then they have Swifty Lazar, because Swifty would take over and make deals for people, even though they weren't really his clients. It was his way of getting them to become his clients. He would call them up and say, "Look, I just made a deal on your behalf." And they'd say, "What? Who are you? I'm not your client." And he would say, "No, I just made this deal for you." So he was really a wheeler and a dealer, and he saw a chance with McMurtry. I think he surmised that Lonesome Dove was going to be a big hit, and so he just moved in and took over and sold that book.
Another interesting thing that you mentioned about Larry is that he always wrote on a typewriter. He never actually owned a computer or a laptop. It was always a typewriter. Was that? Did he just not like technology? Did he just feel that there was a rhythm to the typewriter that worked better for him?
Yeah, exactly. I think he it's what he got used to, and he didn't want to change. He was, as the 5 to 10 pages a day would suggest, he was a man of routine. And I think, again, this goes back to his notion of work. I think the idea of pounding out, words key by key on that manual typewriter probably felt more like physical work to him than working on a slick computer keyboard. I think anything that smacked of physical work was welcome to him, and I think the typewriter gave him that sense.
He loved Fritos, Dr. Pepper, peanut patties, chocolate Hershey bars, which he put on the dashboard of his car, let it soften up, and then just lick it right out of the wrapper.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he would be at Swifty Lazar's fabled Oscar night parties. So again, that dichotomy of the guy with he's kind of austere, hardworking, simple tastes, but also had a taste for the sublime.
Yeah, and I think we can translate those contradictory traits into the writing itself. I mean, if you think about McMurtry's work, what's unique about him is that he is both a literary writer. His books are taken seriously by literary critics, but he was also a popular writer. He wrote numerous bestsellers. So you can't think of too many people since Charles Dickens' day, I think, who straddle those lines between serious literary work and very popular commercial work. And McMurtry does both. And I really can't think of too many writers who straddle that gap. And it's the same kind of thing, from caviar to Hershey bars, from the Pulitzer Prize to best-selling movie adaptations. It's an unusual combination.
Dwight Garner was saying about your biography that it reads a bit like one of McMurtry's novels. Elegy and humor bleed into each other. He also said that there were passages in there where you got folksy. Do you try to, because you've written other biographies of writers, did you try to kind of reflect Larry's mentality, his language, his phraseology, or was that just because you're a Texan yourself? Was it just a natural byproduct of how you write?
Yeah, I think that's my style anyway, just because I'm from the same place McMurtry is. But I will say that when I'm writing a biography, I certainly don't want to fall into the trap of imitating the voice of the person I'm writing about. But I do think it's important to convey not just information about a subject, but a sense of the rhythm and the texture of a writer. So I do try to, without falling into imitation, I do try to convey a bit of the rhythm of what it might be like to read this writer. I think writers' voices are so unique and are so personal and very much a part of where they come from. So I think texture and rhythm are important aspects to convey in a biography as well. But the folksy business that Dwight Garner noted, that's just the way I write too.
No, I get it. Just to fill out the quotation you used earlier that I liked so much, here's the full quote from your book, from your biography, and this is you quoting Larry McMurtry. He said, "For me, the novel is a character creation." That first sentence alone just grabs me. And then he says, "Style is nice, plot is nice, structure is okay, social significance is okay, symbolism worms its way in, timeliness is okay too. But unless the characters convince and live, the book's got no chance." I think that's just a great quote for writers and aspiring writers, because you've got to, and that's the way I read. I'm all about the characters and the situations. A book doesn't even necessarily have to go anywhere. It doesn't even have to have much of a plot. Just give me interesting characters, interesting situations, and I'm engaged. And Larry delivered that in a big way.
He did indeed. And I think that is a quote that every writer should hang above the desk.
Now, you've been generous with your time, Tracy. And I really loved your biography. I didn't just read it, or in this case, listen to it. It was audio, the audio edition. but I really devoured it. It was really good work, very comprehensive. What else? I've asked you a lot of questions about Larry. Is there anything else that you wanted to add? Anything else we should know about Larry, or or anything that you came away from the whole project with that really kind of transfixed you?
The word that keeps coming to mind for me when I think about Larry McMurtry is generosity. We've talked about his contradictory qualities and how he could be taciturn and somewhat aloof. And yet, despite that, I just see this great generosity in him. 40 books, he wrote 40 books, of which I should mention, I think the nonfiction is some of his best work. We didn't talk about that, and it's rarely mentioned, but he was a great nonfiction writer. His books of essays are just terrific and overlooked. But back to the point, 40 books, that's you can say, well, that's just too much, that's compulsive, that's obsessive. I think it's generous. Here's a man who spent his life trying to communicate, and he did. The amazing number of friendships he had and relationships that he had. The bookstores. I mean, he was really trying to promote the culture of the book throughout the country with all these bookstores. Just an enormously generous man who gave a great deal. And I think that's a lesson for writers as well. You can't be parsimonious. You have to give everything you've got and put it on the page. And I think that's what McMurtry did. And so that's another word we should all hang above our desks: generosity.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And any writers out there, aspiring writers, this biography, just to see a prolific writer and successful writer like Larry McMurtry, this book is really inspirational. So I would certainly encourage you to get out there. And also, again, Dwight Garner said it, vastly entertaining. You'll be entertained from beginning to end. And again, my guest is biographer Tracy Daugherty, born in Midland, Texas, a fellow Texan like Larry McMurtry. And if you look in the episode notes, I have a link to Tracy Daugherty's page. You can learn more about him. He's written, again, novels, short stories, personal essays. The list goes on. He's a prolific writer in his own right, and has written biographies about famous writers like Joseph Heller, Joan Didion, and of course, Larry McMurtry. And the list is longer than that. Tracy, thank you for taking the time. Really interesting discussion, and I really appreciate you having produced that piece of work. It was a great read.
Thank you, Mike. I enjoyed it.